Scripture reading this morning is from Ruth, chapter 3. And I'm reading from my New Living Translation Bible. Verse 1 of chapter 3 says, "One day Naomi said to Ruth, 'My daughter, it is time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight he will be whittling barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath and put on perfume and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor, but do not let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go and cover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do.' 'I will do everything you said,' Ruth replied. So she went down to the threshing floor that night and followed the instructions of her mother-in-law. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of the grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. 'Who are you?' he asked. 'I am your servant Ruth,' she replied. 'Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer.' 'The Lord bless you, my daughter,' Boaz exclaimed. 'You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a young man, whether rich or poor. Now, do not worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman. But while it's true that I am one of your family's redeemers, there is another man who is more close related to you than I am. Stay here tonight, and in the morning I will talk to him. If he is willing to redeem you, very well. Let him marry you. But if he is not willing, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will redeem you myself. Now lie down here until morning.' So Ruth laid at Boaz's feet until the morning. But she got up before it was light enough for people to recognize each other. For Boaz said, 'No one must know that a woman was here at the threshing floor.' Then Boaz said to her, 'Bring your cloak and spread it out.' He measured 6 scoops of barley into the cloak and placed it on her back. Then he returned to the town. When Ruth went back to her mother-in-law, Naomi said, 'What happened, my daughter?' Ruth told Naomi everything Boaz had done for her, and she added, 'He gave me these 6 scoops of barley and said, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.' Then Naomi said to her, 'Just be patient, my daughter, until we hear what happens. The man won't rest until he has settled things today.'"
A few nights ago, Kristen and I were talking on the phone, and she was really distressed about something. And it wasn't something I did or said. It had nothing to do with me, just to clear up that issue. For a little bit, I had no clue what to say to bring her back to a place of peace, so I prayed silently. After all, the reality is that what the Lord has to say through me is far more valuable than what I would have to say on my own. When she finished talking, I read Psalm 91 to her and then prayed for her. And that made a huge difference for her. That really changed the tone. So as her future husband, I have a special calling in her life to be the Lord's agent his messenger or his representative to bless and care for her. It's not just that the Lord has called me to bless and care for her and to bring her peace when she's not feeling at peace. No, the Lord is not calling me to give her what peace I have, what love I have, and what wisdom I have, or don't have. The Lord wants to work and communicate through me to bless her. He has far more and better peace, love, and wisdom than I do any day of the week. So using me as a vessel to bless her is far better than just, me saying what's on my mind. So I am, in a way, I am the Lord's agent in a certain way to bless her. Now, she also receives blessing from the Lord directly, but I have a special role. Of course, it's not just husbands or future husbands who have a role as the Lord's agents. Yes, wives have a special spiritual role as well. But then in other relationships, also we as believers have opportunities to be the Lord's representatives in a dark world. Ephesians 2 verse 10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." So we may be called to speak to people or pray for people. We may be called to serve people in some way through giving, through acts of kindness or however else. Or we may be called to serve people in some other way. But this is something that all believers can do in one way or another, being sensitive to his Spirit and how he wants to work through us. So we see at the end of chapter 2 that Ruth gleaned in the fields of Boaz through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. So there's some time that goes by between chapters 2 and 3. Presumably, Ruth had more opportunities to have lunch with Boaz and his servants. So, presumably they had more time to get to know each other. One thing we don't see so far, though, is, previous to this point, is time to speak to each other in private. If they're all eating lunch together, that's not really private. Even in the occasions when Boaz had spoken to her in chapter 2, it may be semi-private, but not really private. It's in a field. Naomi had in mind something that Ruth should bring up with Boaz in private. Naomi wanted her beloved daughter-in-law to be provided for. And in that day and age, that was the job of her late husband's family. It's kind of funny in a way. You see Naomi at least one time say concerning Boaz, that man is our close relative. Well, what she means by that is he's a close relative of Naomi's late husband. She's certainly not a close relative of Ruth, and she's not a very close relative of Naomi either. But that's not actually what matters. What matters is whether he's a close relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz was winnowing barley at the threshing floor. So that's the last stage of bringing in the harvest, other than, of course, bringing it back to the barn for storage or to the house, wherever you're storing it. So that sounds like a fairly good reason to rejoice and make merry, right? Of course, we can see from the way Boaz speaks in the middle of the night that he's not drunk. He's merry but not drunk. Of course, they hadn't brought the harvest back to the safety of the barn yet, So that's a good reason not to leave it alone out in the open where animals and thieves can get at it. It's possible that this threshing floor may be a public space that's shared by the town of Bethlehem. Therefore, instead of sleeping in his nice warm bed, Boaz is sleeping at the end of the grain pile. And clearly some of his servants are also sleeping around the grain pile as well. They're not standing guard, but they're at least they are there, and they can wake up if something happens. So this is Ruth's opportunity to speak to Boaz in private. So ironically, Boaz is there to protect his grain from thieves in the night. And as it happens, someone does come in the night. And at the end, he gives her some grain to carry home, the grain that he's there to protect. So this is where the social customs start to seem a bit strange to us. It's not like our culture. Ruth uncovers Boaz's feet. Now, naturally speaking, that would cause his feet to get cold, right? Which would probably cause him to wake up and notice that there's a woman laying at his feet. And that is what happened. There may be more cultural significance. There's certainly, an intimacy there. Not an inappropriate intimacy, but there's that there. But I'm not entirely sure what the cultural significance is of the fact that, Boaz his feet are uncovered until he puts the wing of his garment over Ruth and his feet. When he woke up and said, "Who are you?" she replied, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Now this may seem very alien to us, or it may even sound improper. We may not understand this, but if you look at the text, it's clear that Boaz understood it perfectly. He knew exactly what she was saying. He didn't come back with a response like, "Huh? What are you talking about?" He knew what she wanted, and he knew what it meant. And he knew that it wasn't improper. We can see from his response he wasn't the slightest bit confused about what she meant. They were speaking the same cultural language. It's just not a language that we can understand very well. Ruth said, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." So there's a Hebrew word in there that has multiple meanings, and it's really helpful to understand its range of meanings. The word is kanaf. In the NIV, along with several other translations, it's translated the corner of your garment. In the English Standard Version, it reads, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." So either spread the corner of your garment over your servant, or spread your wings over your servant. So the Hebrew word kanaf refers to the extremity or the edge of something, such as a bird's wing, the edge or corner of a garment, or something else to that effect. So why does it matter? There are multiple reasons, actually. One of the beautiful poetic parts that stands out in the previous chapter is verse 12, where Boaz said to Ruth, May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz pictures Ruth as taking refuge under the wings of the Lord. And of course, the word for wings in chapter 2 is the same word translated corner of your garment in chapter 3. So it's very helpful to know that. Ruth did come to take refuge under the wings of the Lord, but the Lord will use a human agent to bless Ruth, specifically Boaz. And yes, Boaz will be greatly blessed too. Ruth came to take refuge under the shadow of the Lord's wings, and Boaz is called to be the Lord's representative and spread the wings of his garment over Ruth to give her refuge, to give her protection and provision. So this repeated use of the word kanaf, meaning wing or corner of the garment, is not the only indication that Boaz is called to be the Lord's agent in doing the Lord's work. So in the previous chapter, there's a vague statement in verse 20, chapter 2. The translators of the NIV have a passion for clarity, so they make sure to remove all of the vagueness from vague statements. But some statements are actually supposed to be vague, just to state things clearly. So we'll look at 2:20 in the chapter 2, verse 20 in the English Standard Version. Naomi says concerning Boaz, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." So the question is, when you read that, whose kindness is it that hasn't forsaken the living or the dead? Is it the kindness of the Lord or the kindness of Boaz? Let me read it again. "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." It's just kind of dangling there. It can be interpreted either way, and it's vague like that in several translations, which leads me to think that the Hebrew is probably just as vague. At the end of the day, it is the kindness of the Lord expressed through Boaz. So Boaz is showing Ruth favor and taking care of her because the Lord favors her and wants to take care of her through Boaz. When we read Ruth 2, chapter 12, "May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge," it, of course, reminds us of Psalm 91, verse 4, which Jenny mentioned last week, where it says, "He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge." Psalm 91 is not the only psalm with that imagery, though. There are 5 others. Incidentally, of those 6 psalms, Psalm 91 is the only one not attributed to King David. All of the others are. So let's look at the others a little bit, at least a few of them. Psalm 17, verse 8 says, "Keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings." Psalm 36, verse 7 says, "How precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings." Psalm 57, verse 1 says, "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by." So I could go on, but I think we can say that the image of being protected under the shadow of the wings is an image of being provided for and protected by someone you're in a covenant relationship with. In Ezekiel 16, the Lord pictures Israel as a baby girl that he rescued who grows up. The imagery is a little graphic with umbilical cords and blood and nakedness. But in Ezekiel 16, verse 8, it says, "When I passed by you again and saw you, behold, you were at the age for love, and I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. So clearly in Ezekiel, spreading the corner of his garment or spreading his wing over Israel is a physical expression of entering into a covenant to marry her. So in Psalms, taking refuge under the shadow of the Lord's wings is an image of being provided for and protected in a covenant relationship between God and man. And then on the human level, the future husband spreading his wings, that is the corner of his garment, over his future wife is also a symbol of entering into a covenant where he will provide for and protect her. Oh, and yes, Jewish men were commanded to make tassels on the corners of their garments. It's the same word. And the tassels were to serve as a reminder of the Lord's commandments. So there's already a covenantal significance to the corners of the garment. And yes, people were healed when they touched the corner of Jesus' garment. So it's not clear, in the book of Ruth, Boaz has this garment that he's using as a blanket, basically. Is that the garment with the tassels on it? I don't know. But in any case, there's a significance covenantally to the corner of the garment. In these days, Jewish people don't wear the garment with the tassels all the time. It's called a talit, a prayer shawl, basically. And at some Jewish weddings, the groom will wrap the prayer shawl around them both. And then also in a Jewish wedding, the bride and groom are married under a canopy, which is called a chuppah. In some cases, the cloth that forms the top of the canopy above them both is a prayer shawl. So the cultural symbolism that we see here in Ruth, lives on in some form even today. So Ruth calls on Boaz to do his part as a kinsman redeemer. In the Torah, the Lord called on family members to take care of each other. For close relatives to step in when necessary, when their family members needed help. A kinsman redeemer could be called to do 4 different things. So first of all, if a relative fell on hard times and had to sell his land which he had received as an inheritance from the Lord, then a close relative, a kinsman redeemer, was called to step in and buy the land so that it would stay in the family and the poor relation would be provided for. I think we know someone who's actually done that. Secondly, if a poor relation ended up in slavery, a kinsman redeemer could buy him back and treat him as a hired servant. Thirdly, a kinsman redeemer would seek justice for a murdered relative. And fourthly, if a woman got married but her husband died without having a son, the husband's close relatives are called to marry the widow and produce a son as an heir. So there's an indication in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 through 10, in that last case, which speaks of that, marrying the widow without a son, that at least some of the initiative in that process is in the woman's hand, at least in cases where the man refuses to marry her, and she has to bring the matter before the elders. So at least in that case, the initiative is in the woman's hand. It's not clear whether all of the initiative was typically on the woman's side, but this is the exact situation that Ruth is in, and she does take the initiative, and in the language of cultural symbolism, asks Boaz to enter into a covenant of provision and protection with her. That is a marriage covenant. Yeah, she proposes to her future husband. I'm not sure if that's normal or not, but that is basically what happened here. She was calling on him to do his part as the kinsman redeemer, as an agent of the Lord called to bless and protect his close relatives. And in the end, we'll find out in the next chapter that he's not only redeeming her, but also Naomi's land. As it turns out, Boaz is willing to redeem her, to marry her, and also to buy the fields of her father-in-law, but there's a hitch. Uh-oh. Her late husband had a nearer relative than Boaz, and he gets first dibs. So the matter is left in suspense till morning. Would you be able to sleep in a suspenseful situation like that, where your whole future hangs in the balance and you just have to wait till morning to find out? I think some people could. I wouldn't be sleeping much if I were either one of these characters that night. They both get up before dawn without setting an alarm clock, so maybe they didn't sleep well, though normally if I'm camping, if I'm sleeping outside, the birds singing before dawn can tend to wake me up. So what is redemption? It's pretty simple in some cases. So like if a kinsman redeemer redeems the property of a poor relative, he pays the price of the property in order to keep it in the family and provide for his relative. He buys it back. In the case of a relative sold into slavery, it's basically the same thing. He buys back the slave and treats him with dignity and honor. So in those two cases, the kinsman redeemer is making a one-time payment to help out his relative and to change the situation. In the case of a widow without any sons who could provide for her, a close relative of her late husband would be called on to marry her. So that's not a one-time payment like the other cases. It's a lifelong covenant of provision and protection. It's not a one-time act of redemption. It's an ongoing life of redemption, of making something beautiful out of broken circumstances. The Lord has invited us into a relationship with him. He has invited us to be in a covenant relationship with him where we can dwell under the shadow of his wings. The wings of our provider and protector. In that relationship, we have safety, we have provision, we have a life of fulfillment. And we are also called to be the Lord's agents in the world, to act as his hands and feet. He can surely do things himself. He doesn't need us, but he chooses to partner with us to get things done in the world. And he has redeemed us. He has paid the price with his own life to set us free from slavery. And it's good to be free. And that leaves us no longer as slaves, but as servants of the Lord, called to serve him, but serving the best and most gracious and caring master ever, the one who died to pay the price for our redemption. Whoever calls us into deeper depths of a covenant relationship with him. How blessed we are in Jesus. Amen.